Hey guys, and welcome to the Lunge Lift podcast. Ash and myself are going to be diving into our latest Q&A. So we put out some questions on our Instagrams and we've had a good lot of questions back. So I thought we'd tackle some of them. Maybe might do this over a two-parter episode because we did get a fair few. So we're going to dive into, I think, the first 5 today, maybe if that's all right with you, Ash. And then we'll finish off with the others. So if you don't hear your question today, don't worry, we will be getting to them. But as always, before we get into it, a big thank you to our show sponsor, Wit Fitness. As always, you can check out the store in New Change or the website wit-fitness.com. Use the code LL15 and get yourself 15% off your purchase. And as always, don't forget to tag us in your purchase. We would love to see what you're spending your hard-earned money on. Let's go. Ash, how are you?
Good, thanks, mate.
Good.
Glad it's Friday.
Yep.
We always record on a Friday.
Just let everyone know. So, just thought we could start off with a couple of would you rathers. I like to throw in those little spanners before you know. So, searching online, and I found this website which had like a bunch of would you rathers, and I was reading them. Some of them are a bit too deep, maybe for the podcast, and but some of them I thought were a bit lighthearted enough. So, we're going to kick off with: would you rather lose the ability to lie or believe everything you're told?
I think lose the ability to lie, then you just live a really honest life rather than being naive and gullible and getting taken advantage of the whole time.
I'd have to fully agree. I think, but just that pure bliss of just knowing that. But just imagine saying, I guess it doesn't say if you have to say what you think, and that's true. Yeah, exactly. Sometimes that might be a little bit awkward, but. A bit of an easy one here. Not easy. Would you rather eat shit that tasted like chocolate or eat chocolate that tasted like shit?
Just thinking of the macros. Shit that tastes like chocolate or chocolate that tastes like shit. I think I'd go shit that tastes like chocolate.
I got to do the same. Yeah, at least you're getting some macros back in.
Yeah,
you're getting like them back through.
It's the second way through. You've got to squeeze out a little bit more nutrition.
Oh. Would you rather experience the beginning of planet Earth or the end of planet Earth?
I think the end. I feel like the beginning would be pretty boring when it's all just sort of single cell organisms and.
But just imagine if. Oh yeah, I guess that's true. I was just saying, just imagine you being there and seeing it, but then it's more a thing of like, really what slow. Does it look like? Yeah, it would be very slow. It'd be very slow. Yeah. It'd be very, very meditative, I'd say. Would you rather reverse one decision you make every day, or be able to stop time for 10 seconds every day?
Stop time.
Really?
I think so. Like, I don't make any mistakes, so what's the point? Just kidding.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I revert to I don't know if you saw the Rick and Morty episode of it's one of the latest series where have you seen Rick and Morty? Yeah,
I've seen some. I don't think I've seen the latest.
But basically in the latest series, basically the son essentially gets from his granddad, like the main guy, Rick and Morty. So Morty gets a remote that basically every time he does something he shouldn't do, he can do it in a rewinds time. But basically what Rick doesn't say to him is this doesn't rewind time, it puts him to an alternative universe where, so basically all the things that he's done wrong are still happens. So I can just imagine this really bad thing. And I think last one, would you rather have 7 fingers on each hand or 7 toes on each foot?
Fingers. My feet are already wide, so that would be a nightmare.
See, I thought you'd go wear toes. Shoes. I thought you'd go toes because you'll have a lot more stability in all your triplanar movements.
Yeah, but shoes, it's a funny thing. I think I don't know anyone who's got narrow feet. Everyone thinks they've got wide feet, and I think shoes are just too narrow. So if you've got a wider foot, then life's going to be even more of a nightmare. And
it's true.
Unless you get 7, you've got the same width foot with 7 toes. In that case, yeah,
that'd still look really weird then, because then you'd have a really tiny big toe.
Yeah, but 7 fingers, Might help the single arm pull up, just a little bit of extra stability.
It's true. Yeah, I didn't actually think of it like that. But right, let's get into, I'd say, our first proper question from one of the listeners. So Sue asks, if we weren't in fitness, what would we do as a profession? I thought this was a really good one because because we've both left an industry to be in fitness, we've kind of done this decision. So what would you do if you had to change again?
Yeah, it's a good question. I've never thought about this, which is, like you say, quite a positive sign because I'm sure that this is where I want to be. But when I saw this morning, I got thinking about what other things. I think sport is a bit of a cop-out because it's a very closely related to fitness, and you could argue that I do a bit of that already, working with a lot of sports people. But the other element of my job that I really like is the teaching. So some sort of education, even though I kind of do that already, and I do fitness education, but I wouldn't mind teaching other things as well. I think it's in my future that I will be a kids rugby coach at some point along the line, because I think that'll just be super rewarding, and sport is a great vehicle for teaching great life lessons. But if I had to go completely away from sport as well as fitness, I think some role in education, whether it's kids or at university, would be cool. Maybe some sort of research into sports science, which again is still a bit of a cop out because it's very related, but the academic side of things does intrigue me as well as the application.
Yeah, I think I'd have to go with a similar-ish sort of answer, and I'd probably like to do PE for kids, just because again that thing of, as I've been into fitness now for as long as we both have, is in like you've seen the value and how much you can really impact people's lives, and the earlier you can start that, I think it'd be so. If I was in primary school, and just the thing is, I understand from the kids' perspective, you're just not going to have the same buy-in. But I think that would be the challenge, and that's what I love about it. Then getting their buy-in and influencing kids' lives in such a way that they then want to carry on beyond that. But I think if I wasn't in fitness, and to try not to do any cop-outs, I'd probably like to be a psychiatrist or something like that. I like to listen to people's problems and try and solve them. I don't know if that's a psychiatrist. That's more... Actually, no, I think it is a psychiatrist. Listen to people's issues and then try them, because I guess as a PT, you listen to this, you listen to people's, and what we do, we try and find ways to make people move and feel better in a session. So we're not necessarily always giving them life advice most of the time, sometimes, but we're giving them a session that might change their state, that then they leave us feeling better and just they have a different frame of life essentially because they're in a better place. So, and also then give them sometimes realize that a lot of the things that life happens is just bollocks. So you just so it's just and at the end of the day, it's not that bad, and it probably get better most of the time. You do so anyway.
It is a funny thing, isn't it? That I do believe physical and mental health are very closely related, but the boundaries between a coach, like a physical training coach, and like a life coach are getting increasingly blurred, and you do see people stepping slightly outside their lane sometimes. I mean, it is part and parcel of any relationship between two people that you're going to talk about things that aren't directly in your the bounds of your job. But I think it's a natural segue. You see a lot of people move from physical training into more life coaching or counselling because they realise
it's such a wanky term, isn't it? Though life coach, I hate. And this is just me being honest. I would love to be a life coach, but I'd hate to call myself one. Also, I'm 32. I've still got a lot of life to hopefully live, and at the same time, it's like because I've toiled with this so many times actually, and it's not that I want to now be a life coach, but it's the thing of the experiences that I may not have had. I've had other ones which I can maybe think about how I would apply myself to that situation. So it's giving the other person a different frame of mind. So it's not even that I've had to experience all the experiences to be able to then be a life coach itself. And I just think it's, as you said, because there's just so many people becoming, say, life coaches, but what is a life coach? And I think that's because dealing with people means you deal with so many different situations as it comes by. And so for me, that's just a fascinating thing. And I love that. And I love having those troubles. So it's really cool. So thanks, Sue. Second question from John. So training when you're an old timer, how to train smarter and keep in shape? Nice and to the point.
Good question. Yeah, I think it's the Instagram character limit, and the question just makes people be extra concise. So, yeah, thanks, John. That's a good question, and we've actually got an episode which should be out by the time you're hearing this with Kelly Friel, and she's a masters athlete and has loads of wisdom to share on how she's changed her training over time as she's got a little bit older. So check that out for a real deep dive into this question. I think for me, the key things in training older athletes compared to younger ones is being conscious of recovery. Recovery generally slows down. Like even as I've entered my 30s, I've noticed that I can handle slightly less volume or maybe take slightly longer to recover from the really strenuous sessions. And I think it is Wendler who, was it Wendler or what's the other, the 5x5 guy?
Ripto.
Yeah, I think it's Ripto. Yeah.
Ripto.
He talks about this and says that as he got older, he went from deadlifting every week to every 2 weeks because same thing, he just couldn't recover as quickly, but he could still make progress with slightly reduced frequency. So keeping an eye on your recovery and generally less volume. So this is something Kelly talks about, focusing more on the quality of your sessions rather than the quantity. And this isn't specific to older athletes, but keeping focused on your key performance indicators. So what are you actually training for? And are those things trending positively over time? If they are, then training's going well. And I think this is something that's probably more applicable to older athletes, is the temptation to get greedy is even more costly because you have that finer margin, like a smaller margin for error. If you do it's easier to overtrain and under recover. So I think older people are generally better at this anyway with their extra wisdom and experience, but making smarter decisions and not trying to cram in more than they can handle, like the young bucks can get away with.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It's happening the same with me. As you say, you're getting a little bit older, you're realizing that what you was able to do. So I cycled to Brighton back the other day. So 155 miles, 250k, went swimming on the Wednesday. So that was on a Tuesday. On the Wednesday night, I felt fine. I was like, oh, cool, I'm good. Went swimming Wednesday night in the open water. And then it just hit me like a freight. I was just like, then the rest of the week, I was just like, fuck, and it's, I think I was still on the high of the cycle, like, yeah, I'm good. I feel great. And then just suddenly the reality of what you'd done. And yes, I tried to fuel and stuff, but it was just a challenge which my body wasn't necessarily ready for. But I think in relation to the training, I have to obviously fully agree with that, the conscious recovery. And I think a big thing is, especially if you've been training for quite a while, to try not to compare yourself to what you did do, because that's been my biggest say flaw. And obviously when an old timer doesn't necessarily mean age, it's also then training age. Because the thing is as I say, if you've been say training for say 10 years and you look back at what you could do, and as you said, what you can get away with, you think, I've touched on this in previous podcasts, be able to just lift weights cold and not worry about implications, where now I'm like, I could do that. But now, as you said, I think the wisdom, I think there's a good bit there. I now look at it and just think, I don't think I should do this. And I'm not afraid to then not do it. Sometimes I do, but most of the time I'm just like, it's just not worth it. And I think that is a big thing, is comparing yourself to, as you said, your KPIs, looking at where you're going to and looking at where you are now and understanding where you've been. So understand that you've built yourself to where you are now. So cool, okay. Now what's the next step, the next chapter? And just maybe summarizing the previous one, understanding that, and then moving on. So yeah, so I like that one. It's a nice one. So
it's pain, eh?
Yeah. Sophie asked, I want to get my first push-up and pull-up. where do I start? Based on some of your other episodes, I presume it would just say stay as close to the exercise as possible. Jesus, that was a bit of a mouthful. But yeah, stay as close to the exercise as possible. Great question. I think Mr. Mr. Pull-up, should I say, not Mr. Pull-up. I suppose you can do push-ups, you do ring dips. So yeah. So what would you recommend for someone trying to get their first pull-up or push-up?
Yeah, love this. And I love the fact that Sophie's saying to stay as close to the exercise as possible. On that, staying high up that spectrum of specificity, we should always stay as close to the top end as we can while getting the stimulus that we want. So when we relate this to the task at hand of the first push-up and the first pull-up, getting clear on the training stimulus that we want for that person. So there's no hard and fast rule of what the right exercise or progression is for everybody, but there are some fundamentals that need to be present to achieve these movements. And that applies whether it's your first push-up or whether it's your first muscle-up. And what are the key criteria for a push-up? You must be able to support your body weight in a full plank. So how good is your shoulder stability? How good is your core stability to hold that body position? And then how good is your pressing strength? And depending on which of those two key criteria is your limiter, will shift the emphasis of what movements you put into your program. So a lot of people will go to kneeling push-ups, and that allows them to do more reps and get that upper body pushing stimulus, but that negates the core training benefits of being in a full plank position. So if your core is your limiter, you're going to get really good at the press side of things, but actually when you come to try a full push-up, it doesn't carry over nearly as well. So for these sorts of people, I would prefer hand elevated push-ups, either on parallettes or on a box or even a wall, so that you get the integration of the press component with the core stabilization component. And I've seen an amazing thing for somebody like this, where they couldn't do a normal push-up, but they could do a feet elevated push-up, because the sagging of the hips loaded the core more. So they got the stability from the core, which was the limiter, and the press strength was present. So they could do a feet elevated push-up, but they could not do a normal push-up. Wow. And the lady's husband was actually watching at the time, and his mind was just completely blown, because he'd seen her trying to do push-ups for however long. And he was just like, what the fuck? Like, that's harder. Like, he trains. He's like, yeah. I know that's harder. So how can you do that, but you can't do it flat? And it's exactly that. The core was a limiter, and actually putting the trunk and the hips into some extension meant that she got more out of those muscles. So they were more stable, and then she could do the push-up. So step one is identifying what your limiter is. Is it the pressing strength, or is it the core stability and control? And then standard principles of training, progressive overload on those movements, as always staying as close to the exercise as possible. So I would always prefer a elevated push-up to a bench press, just because you're getting more things in common, even though one is still a press exercise. And for the pull-up, same thought process. What are the fundamentals? You've got the hanging from the bar. So you need to build up your ability to just dead hang from a pull-up bar and build up a good amount of work capacity there, so you can get a meaningful amount of training volume. And then the stimulus is either the hanging and control of the lower body while you're hanging from the bar, or obviously the vertical pull. So lat pull down is obviously the standard exercise that most people would go to here. But again, if the core is the limiter, then you might be able to pull your body weight on a lat pull down for one, which should mean you get a pull up. But because it's such a stable movement, you actually can't coordinate that hanging from a bar. So just getting really good at hanging. We've got an exercise on our YouTube channel called Hanging 3-Way Lunges, where you basically hang from the bar and move your legs forwards, back, left, right, and rotation. So you're building really specific core control when hanging from the pull-up bar, and it ticks so many boxes, from grip strength to shoulder stability to core control, and they all carry over to the pull-up way more than standard exercises like, well, even like a plank wouldn't carry over as well to your pull-up. So I think that's probably enough to be getting on with. Sophie, I hope that helps.
That is, man. I was listening intently there. But I'd say, coming from my perspective, I'd obviously have to agree with most of that stuff. Well, I'd agree with all of it. The one thing I would personally say, so I'm a big fan as well of, say, so let's start with the push-up, the elevated one. For me, I like to use, say, a squat rack or something like that, and a barbell, and work my way down the base of the holes to know the closer you're getting to the floor, because that's your way of progressive overload. So if you don't understand, that's, a box is good, but it's really hard to go from 45 to 30 to then parallel, so you're close to the floor. So there's quite big jumps I found with a squat rack. Utilizing those holes as you move the J hooks down can really, really help. Obviously, performing negatives, I think I'm a big fan of in general, because negatives is staying with the movement itself, especially with a push-up. I think a negative push-up is even for a trained athlete who can bang out push-ups, doing negative push-ups is such, not only a great pump, but also it just it massively fatigues your chest, shoulders, and your triceps, and it really tells you if you're doing something right or wrong, because if you're way too shoulder dominant, you'll feel them burning out way too early. And so I think a negative plank push-up is a great way to really, and I'm not a big fan of bands, but I think for overloading the movement, you can hang, say, a band from the rig and put it around your hip. And as long as you can maintain a hollow position, because the band is going to pull your hip essentially into hyperextension. So you need to be able to maintain that pelvic tuck and then perform push-ups. So it's a way of giving you a little bit of assistance while you're doing the push-up. With the pull-up, I would say as close to, like as Ash was saying, with getting good at hanging. You've got things like, again, using a squat stand or something like that, doing some self-assisted pull-ups. I prefer them to a banded pull-up, because then you're able to dictate how much effort you're giving back. Then I've definitely got one on my YouTube thing, but we can definitely show you one. I'll put one in the notes so you can see, but it's essentially using your legs to dictate how much effort with the pull, so you can give that back. There's a lot of people do banded pull-ups, and I think they're great at maybe getting to overload the movement, just like I said with the banded push-ups. So doing multiple reps. But what you'll find, and I see with multiple clients, is when people struggle with a pull-up in general, normally the first thing to go is their core. Their legs come up, their knees come up, because they're trying to really give themselves as much as they can to get to the top. Now, when you do that with a band, you're actually negating the purpose of the band. So you're making it harder for yourself, and you've got this band. So if you are using a band, really focus on maintaining that total body tension throughout, because that is what's going to help you long term with a pull-up. Because most of the time your body can't sequence properly, because there's so many things it has to think about rather than just the pull. So
that's negatives as well, mate. I think is the negatives for the pull-up.
Negatives, yeah. So sorry,
massive.
I said in the push-up, negative pull-up, probably the king for me to trying to get to your first pull-up. But then you also do need the concentric, which is then where I then said about the assisted one with your feet, because then you're giving it back. So you do need because I think as you'll probably know, there's a lot of focus on the eccentric for building strength, but you do still need the concentric. It's all well and good being really strong on the way down, but if you haven't got the power and the muscle fibers that actually contract it back up, it's sort of pointless. So
there's a nice middle ground for those, is doing your negatives and adding pulses on the way down. So have a pause, chin over the bar, and then basically try to just stop the negative and reverse the direction, even if it's just a tiny amount, but you're training that contraction rather than so you're training the concentric contraction rather than just only the eccentric. So you're getting a bit of a stimulus along the way down.
It's funny because I'd class that as, in a way, like doing like half reps. So, like people say doing half jumps where there aren't, so people, with it, sorry, this we're going on a little bit of tangent here, but it's pretty good. So with pull-ups, obviously, we're talking about a full range of motion with the arms. So you go to full extension and you get the scapular retraction, you get to the top, wherever your top is. It doesn't always mean chin over the bar. It just means your top contraction of the movement. Now, when it comes to pull-ups, there's a lot of time, if people can do more reps with a slightly bent arm, and so they don't go to that full extension, they can over time focus on getting a little bit lower. But one thing I would say, if you do pull-ups like that, is add a pause in at that bottom position, just so you're not yanking into your bicep every single time. So you're basically lowering yourself down, slight pause, then pull again, because you're going to be maintaining tension. You will find it's a massive bicep pump there, because you're just then holding so much stress with the arms. So it's not necessarily my go-to, but just as a way. So thanks, Sophie. So we have another one here. Question number 4, RJB Freeman. Is there a link between intense bench strength and mobility?
Yeah, so I know who this is, and he used to be a bench fiend, and I think he's taking the piss, but I think it's a good talking point nevertheless. And I would say, yes, there is a correlation between intense bench strength and mobility, and it's usually inverse. So so Rich, the guy who submitted the question, used to be a very strong bencher. I think he's now not a very strong bencher, and it really grinds his gears. But he also moved terribly, and that's not always the case, but there is a slight correlation between intense barbell strength and mobility, especially for powerlifters who become hyper specialized for the sport. And for these people, the stiffness is actually an advantage because it keeps them safe in the position that they compete in. So if you have super flexible shoulders, that's not actually going to help you in a competition bench press. One piece of evidence that really backs this up is the use of bench shirts. So if you're not familiar with this, there's basically these Kevlar sleeves that you squeeze yourself into. Usually it's a 3-man job to put them on, and it essentially stops your shoulders from ripping out sideways and gives you a lot of assistance in keeping your shoulders where they are. People walk around with their arms just stuck out in a fixed position because there's no shoulder motion really whatsoever, and it allows you to bench incredible amounts more than you can actually bench. So it shows you that stiffness is a positive adaptation for lifting more weight. So actually the adaptations that are favored and rewarded in powerlifting are stiffness to some degree to keep you stable in that shape. So the same could be said of spines in deadlifting. Having a really stiff spine means it's not going to flex out of control, and you can then yank up more in your deadlift. So I think, that's sort of the answer to Richard's question. There is a correlation, and it's inverse.
Yeah, to be honest, I'd have to say as well with this in particular, we've mentioned this on previous episodes and stuff like that, but being tight for the task at hand is a good thing. Like in episode 10, we discussed about if you were lacking mobility or stability. So we was discussing about I remember we mentioned about the wall ball, and actually getting to having a tight bottom of squat position is so much better than having this ass to grass, just get to the bottom position, because you're creating a spring if you're tight. So for the performance of a wall ball, you're great. So, and in this case, if you got a tight shoulders, tight chest, tight this position, it's gonna be a bit of an easier time for the bench press. But then you have to ask, how does it impact other areas of your life? And that's obviously not the question. But for the task at hand, it's a good thing. So
exactly, yeah. Trade-offs everywhere.
So there we go. And lastly, I think we should finish this one. It's a really, really cool one. I think we could really go into a bit of depth with this one. But Leanne Bryant asked, I'm just starting out with weightlifting, her weightlifting journey, since joining the world of CrossFit just over a year ago. and she wants to feel comfortable with all Olympic lifts, especially snatches and her overhead squats. But she's a huge critic of herself and very often gets inside her own head. If she fails a lift, what's the best way to then rest and not let that failed lift overtake her mind? I love this because this kind of goes to what I said at the start, the psychology side of things.
Yeah.
It's like the mental attitude towards lifting has, we've briefly mentioned this in the past, and before we go into maybe some of the intricate details of this that I know you're going to get into, Ash, when I've had, say, clients and stuff lifting weights they've not known on the bar, and they've been able to lift it with no problem because they've essentially not been inside their head, it is a really powerful thing. So I think it's a really great question to, once you start to overcome this, and I don't think you'll ever fully overcome it, to be honest with you, and I don't think that's ever the goal, to be completely detached, because you want to have that emotion behind some of, in my opinion, unless you're a professional athlete, then that's maybe a thing. But if you're doing this for fun and you want to be good in your sense of good, then I love it. So yeah, Ash, do you want to?
Sure. Yeah, I love this question as well. And I think if you want to read a book about this sort of thing, something I recommend quite often since reading it has been The Inner Game of Tennis. And the guy is a tennis coach, and I think he's got some psychology qualifications as well. But he basically realized, as a lot of coaches do, as we said earlier, that the head and mental side of things is a key for unlocking levels of performance. And it's quite a common concept in a lot of pop psychology to have the sort of two sides of your brain, whether it's system 1, system 2, or the reptilian versus human brain, and the sort of thinking fast and slow type thing. And basically what it boils down to is you have a very primitive and instinctive, fast acting sort of body controlling side of your brain. And then you have the really conscious human thinking, talking side of things. And you almost need to view them as two separate entities, and managing the interaction between the two is a huge part of making the most of your performance. And I think everybody knows somebody who is very self-critical, or if you're not self-critical yourself, who whenever you're playing sport, it's just like, oh, that was so shit. Like, why do I keep fucking that up? And they're very, critical. And if you almost think of the first part of your brain as your inner child, you're essentially continually chastising it and making it feel shit about itself, and trying to consciously force it to do things a certain way. But what we know about the body is that most movement should be subconscious and fluid, and that's how you get the most out of your performance, whether it's weightlifting or it's a golf swing or it's a forehand in tennis. The smooth integration of muscle sequencing is more powerful and also more accurate, because the subconscious can coordinate muscles far superiorly to our conscious brain. Like, you can't think of every joint and every muscle in your body when performing such a complex task as weightlifting or striking a ball. So we need to maximize the learning potential of that system 1, which ultimately will lead to the best performances. And how do we do that with our second brain, the more conscious and potentially critical side of things? It's basically just relinquishing a little bit of control and letting the subconscious learn by itself, learn by making mistakes. In the same way that a baby learns to walk, it will fall over in all different directions, and the subconscious part of the brain will figure out how to balance by correcting those errors and fine-tuning them. And the same process is happening whether we're snatching or we're hitting a forehand. You miss a little bit forwards, you relate the outcome to a certain aspect that you're focusing on. So you could be like, right, I'm just going to think about where the bar is as it passes my hip or as it passes my sternum. And then I'm going to correlate that with whether I make the lift or not, with a light enough weight that you can get a decent amount of reps in, which is also crucial for skill acquisition. One of the things he recommends in the Inner Game of Tennis is just calling out, say, bounce, hit. So you're conscious of the timing of when the ball bounces and when it hits your racket, and or something as simple as the sound of the ball hitting your strings. And because you're concentrating hard on something that's a little bit detached from the outcome, you're just noticing the technique rather than hyper focusing on it and getting really wound up and stressed about it and then criticizing yourself. And it gets a little bit zen where you start saying there is no good or bad. It's just what's the outcome. And I'm just correlating when I focus on this and notice that when I sort my feet out a little bit sooner, I strike the ball more cleanly, or when I keep the bar a little bit closer, I make more snatches. And because you're just correlating the thing that you're looking at, not forcing, the brain and the subconscious brain starts to learn more effectively because it's not worried about the criticism that it's about to receive because you are very self-critical. So it is quite a almost spiritual way of looking at things, but it does relate to the neurology of skill acquisition really nicely. So as a model, I think it's very useful.
Yeah, no, I think massive. And when it comes to this, it's like, especially the part says, being the huge critic of yourself and being inside your own head when you fail a lift, as Ash was basically alluding to that, it's not a problem. Now, one thing I'd ask is, when was this lift taking place? If it's in a training environment, if it's in a competitive environment, it will be slightly different. Even though it shouldn't be, it will be slightly different. But I think it's the skillful part is being able to take the Zen approach that you might be able to find in training and being apply it in a competitive way. Because that's when you look at some of the pro athletes, and especially within weightlifting and stuff, that they might miss 2 of their 3 lifts in a weightlifting competition, and they know they have to hit the next lift no matter what. And that's, I think, the skill of a seasoned athlete and experience, and being able to take each lift as a task at hand rather than dwelling on the past. And just like, as you mentioned, like, this is what I have to do. And so Ash obviously mentioned about there with the bounce of the ball. And I know with like snatches or like jerks, anything going overhead, there's a lot of people, either the stamp of the feet or a shout whenever it lands. As the bar locks out, you're making a loud shouting noise, something like that it works together, but that's your focus is the shout, not the lockout. So as you say, it works as one. Also a skill which has worked is, if you do feel like you, say for instance, you're snatching 60 kilos and you're going for a PB of 60 kilos, and you know you're stronger than this. You've been feeling really good recent training. You've had more weight overhead, and you just know you can get it. It's just not your day so far. A couple of things you can do is that I found worked is something that I think it was Sonny Webster that we got it from, and it's come down. So if you failed, say 60 kilos, come back down to say 45 kilos, because the problem is when people reach, say, 60 kilos, they'll keep doing it over and over and over again. And all you're doing is ingraining a bad movement pattern over and over again and getting more tired. But when you then say come back down to, say, 40, 45, this is obviously in a training environment, come back down to 40, 45, build your way back up and then go to 61. You'll most likely say hit it. If you know you have the right to hit 61 kilos in a snatch, you'll hit that. I'm not guaranteeing it, but I'm giving you a good chance, because it has happened to myself. Because the thing is when we've discussed in previous episodes, whether you're training or competing, like that side of the spectrum, when you're in a gym environment. So when you're there, you need to, if you're trying to PB, you should be asking yourself, cool, okay, why am I PBing? And if you're supposed to, then great. And if you do miss, ask yourself, is it just not my day-to-day? And then you take it as it is and move on and be happy with, say, your 58 kilos that you hit or 59 kilos and move on from that. Or is it you just then say, you take it as I missed 60 kilos, and then you dwell on it? Because I think it's the dwelling on the missed 60 kilos, say, as the example, is where the problem comes. Because once you've hit 60 kilos, then the next one's 61 or 62. Do you know what I mean? Hopefully it's a never ending journey of getting stronger and stronger. So it's understanding that when you do fail, if you can, just take it on the chin. And that's definitely something which I've had to get better at over the years, and I've got a lot better as it comes, because I've just realized it doesn't really matter. And that's the thing. It's like, when I much prefer now, and especially with all my clients, I'd never let them go to that point, but where I remember trying to hit a 120 kilo snatch, and I just kept doing it over and over and over. I got straps, I got everything, and I managed to get it in the end. It wasn't the prettiest, but I did get it, and that was, I don't know how, but I didn't get anything from that except for I hit 120. I just deteriorated my body and nearly done my shouldering because I had the straps, and lost it behind me, lost it in front. Oh, just not a good time. So it wasn't a good thing to do. So just to relay back to that, try not to take it too personally. I think that's the summary of everything I was saying there. Try not to take it too personally. It is what it is.
Yeah, I think that's it. It's noticing why you might have failed. So trying to learn from the experience rather than judging it as good or bad. It's just whatever the outcome is, it's the outcome. And if you can notice and correlate certain focus points with more positive outcomes, that is the process of learning. But at the end of the day, you're not defined by one lift. Everyone fails along the way, and you just need to make sure you're squeezing out as much learning as you can from every rep, versus beating yourself up about it, because this cheesy cliche, but failure is part of the process, and nobody ever got good without little failures along the way. So just putting them in the right box to say, yeah, that was a missed lift, not a failure, and look at the tape. Why did you miss it? And then you've got something else to focus on next time.
Nice. I think that's it, mate. So I think we'll cover the rest in our next episode. But thank you very much to everyone that did submit a question. If you do have a question that we haven't answered today and we're not answering the next one, you can still drop us a message. We do collate our questions and keep them together ready for Q&A episodes. So do throw them on. Ask us on our Instagrams at lunge.lift, or you can follow Ash and myself. All the links are in the bio down below. But as always, thank you very much for your time. Really hope you enjoyed today's episode and you managed to get some gems from it. As always, if you did enjoy it, please do share it with anyone that you may think will benefit from any stuff we cover through, or if you just want to help us grow, just share it with everyone, even if they don't like it or not. So we'd appreciate that. And as always, thanks for your time. Ash, thank you. And
thank you.
We'll see you next week.
Cheers, guys.